Propaganda is any sort of communication which is intended to influence people's attitudes and beliefs towards something. Propaganda does not just impartially state facts. It also isn't a political slant, like stating your opinion and the reasons you hold that opinion. It tries to influence and persuade people in some sort of intellectually dishonest way. It selectively presents facts and commits lies of omission. It may also use loaded rhetoric designed to cause an emotional response rather than appeal to logic and reason. It is usually done to further a political movement. Let me quote Dr. Richard Allen Nelson, a professor of mass communication and public affairs, on his definition of propaganda. I think it is very good and clearly defines what I'm talking about here. Quote, propaganda is neutrally defined as a systematic form of purposeful persuasion that attempts to influence the emotions, attitudes, opinions, and actions of specified target audiences for ideological, political, or commercial purposes through the controlled transmission of one-sided messages, which may or may not be factual, via mass and direct media channels. A propaganda organization employs propagandists who engage in propagandism, the applied creation and distribution of such forms of persuasion, unquote. Here are a few more details about propaganda. A propagandist is willing to use deception and confusion to change a people's actions and expectations. It is similar to censorship in that it aims to prevent people from accepting other points of view. Some propaganda is aimed mainly at deceiving people into believing what the propagandist wants, while other propaganda is used to solidify the beliefs of adherents and relieve their cognitive dissonance. Propaganda may or may not have an identifiable source. Frequently, other organizations will act as front groups, spreading their disinformation without it being linked back to the original source. Usually only people at the top of these groups know their information is misleading. Most rank-and-file group members don't even know the things they are saying are deceptive and dishonest. I will now go over different propaganda techniques. I will explain and also try to give contemporary examples. The examples will probably be mainly American ones, just because that is what I am familiar with. These techniques are used in various forms of propaganda media, such as books, leaflets, posters, movies, TV, radio, junk science, historical revision, and, of course, the Internet. You will probably notice the large overlap between propaganda techniques and logical fallacies. Logical fallacies tend to be the basis of their arguments. I will go over the most important ones and do it in alphabetical order. Ad hominem. That is when you attack your opponent with insults rather than address the argument. A recent example is calling someone a Nazi or a communist. This happens a lot in case you haven't noticed. Ad nauseum. This is an easy catchphrase that is repeated over and over again until it somehow is accepted as true. Yes, we can is a recent example. Government healthcare takeover is another. Appeal to authority. This one hinges on taking an authority figure's word for something rather than examining the evidence. For the right, it is usually saying, Ronald Reagan said this or did that. For the left, it may be a JFK quote. Such a figure may be a good place to get an idea, but it certainly isn't proof that the idea has any merit. The big lie. This is a big one. It is a technique we see quite often. The big lie is when someone continuously repeats a series of events to justify their actions. It has some elements of truth in it, and this is merged with the generalizations and deception of the big lie to supplant the public's accurate perception of the underlying events. Like, for example, during the Cold War, We were worried about the spread of totalitarian rule from the former Soviet Union. This fear of totalitarianism is then conflated with communism, which is then conflated with socialism, which is then confused with socialized. So, therefore, if some service is to be provided by or overseen by the government, it is of course totalitarianism. Then of course it must follow that if the government shouldn't do it, then it must be done by business with no government oversight or regulation of any kind. So it justifies opposing any sort of social program or regulation of business, no matter how beneficial it may be. So that way, they don't have to argue against it. They can just justify their stance with the big lie. Another example is that cutting taxes on the wealthy is good for creating jobs and higher wages. They say that the wealthy run businesses and therefore create jobs and control wages. That is mostly true, but the problem is, when accepting the truth of that, people overlook the fact that it has never been demonstrated that paying less taxes will motivate someone to expand business or increase salaries. The people at the very top have so much they can't even spend it all. Usually it just goes to speculative investments because they have nothing else they can do with it. It's actually a shortage of labor that increases salaries. So that ties in with more jobs, which requires expanding business. As a business expands, they create more jobs. More jobs means there is less surplus of labor or a shortage of it. Increased sales is the only thing that is going to expand business. Paying less taxes can only give you higher sales if you are selling the products to yourself, and that would just be silly. So it's actually consumers who do without a lot of things because of lack of capital, aka poor people, who would actually increase your sales. When they get money, they spend it because they need to. More money in the hands of people who need goods and services means greater demand and greater sales, which causes business to expand. So, the big lie in this case is using an irrelevant fact to distract people from the fact that the argument isn't logically consistent, which in turn justifies the desired action. Classical conditioning. This is when two things are presented together. The first thing is something very negative, while the second thing is not. Then, through this association, eventually, when the second thing is presented alone, it can be considered just as negative as the first thing. Like if you show an object to an animal just before inflicting pain on it, it will come to fear that object. It works like that with people, too. If you compare someone to Hitler enough times, many people will end up with a negative perception of that person. Cognitive dissonance. This is the painful condition of holding two contradictory views. One example is to get a popular celebrity to endorse a candidate. The people will then either have to start liking the politician or hating the celebrity. Suppose you place a lot of value in a certain belief. It might then be very difficult to accept some other fact that shows that belief to be false. So one is likely to believe anything a propagandist tells them if it disputes that other fact, setting their mind at ease about their cherished belief. This is why religion-based wedge issues are very good at gaining support for a candidate who includes them in his agenda. It also makes it extremely difficult to get someone to quit believing in propaganda and other unfounded beliefs. Common man. This is the "I'm just an average Joe" propaganda technique. It's Sarah Palin's bread and butter. "Aw, shucks, y'all just gotta love me. I'm a dumb, uneducated, unsophisticated, religiously zealotous redneck simpleton just like you." Well, except you say it using less pejorative words. Cult of personality. This is where you use a loved celebrity to push your bullshit, thereby gaining from the hero worship. It is also people like Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh who have a base of adoring fans who suck up their every word as ultimate truth. That is the modern usage of the term anyway. The original meaning was a dictator who required all art and music to glorify him in some way and/or make claims of infallibility or divinity. So this one depends on the context. So maybe the modern version is just cult light. Same cult flavor without the authoritarian dictatorial filler. So remember, I am not comparing over-the-top conservative pundits to dictators. These are two completely different meanings. It's only the light version that is relevant to American politics. I'm going to leave it there. I will probably need 2 more videos to finish covering all the more common propaganda techniques.